I guess the million-dollar question is, why?
Why? There are a million answers, or a million words in answer. You would have been in the media observing that over the last year or so, my speeches were not always supportive of the government. But still I felt an obligation as a member of the parliamentary government to protect the interests of the government, protect the political interests of the government. But it reached a point where I had a choice between blind obedience and principled objection. And I could not go on indefinitely. Trying to be diplomatic, trying to protect the interests of the government against principle. You know that diplomacy often leads to hypocrisy. You're trying to be diplomatic, but then you're sounding like a hypocrite. Your conscience must mean something. And therefore, I came to a point where I had to take the decision that if my philosophical and political views do not accord with those of government in terms of its legislation, in terms of its policy, the relationship becomes untenable. This is not about any personality conflict. Personality conflicts really are like a soap opera. And my politics are not the politics of a soap opera. I am more concerned with the horror story that has become life in Barbados. This society and this economy are in crisis. And I could not stand in a parliament from week to week and defend the indefensible. I could not stand in a parliament week after week and try to be diplomatic. And I could not stand in a parliament every week and begin to sound like a hypocrite. I am not a hypocrite. I do not protest my own honesty, but the upbringing that I have had as a child tells me that I should adhere to truth even when it hurts. And I know that the truth hurt the cause of the government, but there's a time when a man must do what a man must do. The relationship becomes untenable. I am not interested in personal conflict. Indeed, I understand a meeting was held last night. I was told this morning that a meeting was held last night and one of the speakers said that there's no trouble in the camp, that the trouble has left the camp. Clearly the reference is to me having left the camp without regret. I would say to him, and I would quote the American legislator John Lewis by way of advice, and I take that advice: be good trouble, necessary trouble, and help America redeem itself. In the context of Barbados, I say to him, I intend to be good trouble, necessary trouble, and help Barbados redeem its soul.
Were there specific policies that you did not agree with?
Oh yes. Last year during the budget debate, my speech, I think, this is not to be modest, stood out for its criticism, deep criticism of government in terms of sending home some of the most vulnerable people in Barbados. When those people receive those jobs, I praise the government. But here was a government sacrificing the interests of the most vulnerable. And here was a government enfranchising a large cadre of Barbadians called consultants who live well, who eat well, who sleep well. And we were condemning the poorest and the most vulnerable people into greater adversity. There was the other question, and I kept silent on it. There was the other question of subjecting our children, our innocent children, who we took to school to a survey which amounted to a grievous invasion of their privacy. And on the subject of education, and that was wrong. That was legally and constitutionally and morally wrong. It should not have happened. I want to tell you this, that if I had remained in the government and the government had brought the proposal for its educational reform to that parliament, I would have physically got up from my seat and walked to the other side to express my objection to the dismantling of an education system which has brought democracy and justice to this country. I am opposed to it, I remain opposed to it, and I will speak at length on it if and when it comes. I have the freedom of the opposition bench to represent the voice of all of those people in this country who have benefited from that system, and all of our children who stand ready to benefit from a continuation of a system that needs reform. It needs curricular reform. I do not believe it needs structural reform. That education system that we know so well has built this country. And when I say built this country, I'm not talking about roads and buildings. I'm talking about the lives of people. The lives of people. You drive any part of Barbados now. If you bring a man back to Barbados who left this country in 1955, he will not recognize it. And the reason he will not recognize it is because our education system has reshaped this country. And I want to say to this government that the effort and the attempt to dismantle that is an attack on the people of Barbados. Those are just examples. You will find these days that people are objecting to it. And sometimes people are not objecting to it necessarily for its content, because the entire content of legislation cannot be without virtue. There are some portions of it that are virtuous. But I want to say to the government that the reason that people are objecting so violently, when I say violently, I don't mean physically, is that the government has lost the trust of people. And that is why you find the objection. It is almost instinctive. People are instinctively opposing the government in the public domain in terms of the legislation that it is bringing to Parliament from week to week, including tomorrow. And hopefully you'll hear me tomorrow. And when you hear me in Parliament, I want to assure you that you will hear objectivity. You're not going to hear personal attacks, because I believe that the time has come when politics in this country must elevate itself beyond personal attacks. Personal attacks are part of cheap theater. That is what it is about. But when cheap theater ends, the real life of people must resume. We sit in there and we stand and throw barbs at each other, and we find it amusing. It is not amusing. The business of the people in this country is never amusing. There's hardship, there's suffering, there's anxiety. There's the question of inflation, runaway of inflation. And as parliamentarians, as legislators, as conscientious citizens of this country who occupy the privileged position of representation, we must find ourselves taking the business of Parliament seriously, and not only the business of Parliament, but the business of people seriously. It's an honor to be there. We have a duty, not to ourselves, but a duty to the people of this country to ensure that democracy and justice must be retained in this country. And on the issue of democracy and justice, I am convinced, I know that democracy in this country is under threat. There has been an erosion of our democratic traditions in this country. People are afraid to speak. The responses that I've received over the last 48, 72 hours indicate that to me. People are saying to me they are glad that I have taken this position. Democracy has been under threat in Parliament because Parliament has become a place of unanimity, even against the interests of the people. I could not continue to be a part of that unanimous expression in favor of government's policy when the people of this country have their interests at risk.
What is the urgency to which you're going to be addressing those agencies?
Yes, and you identified the main agency, Public Accounts Committee. And I suspect that Barbadians are focusing on that committee because Barbadians have lost confidence in the ability of the government to conduct itself with propriety. People believe that there's corruption in high places, and when I say high places, that there's corruption in government. And if people believe that, and if there's evidence of that, it is my duty urgently to constitute or to reconstitute the Public Accounts Committee so that the finances of this country, so that the people's money can be safeguarded, so that account can be given for it. It's called the Public Accounts Committee, so that government may account for the money that it took from people by way of taxes and is now spending arbitrarily and in a wild manner. I referred to the consultants earlier. Government is wasting a lot of money in this country, and we're wasting a lot of our citizens who are at risk, who are below the poverty line. They're wasting money, and we're wasting the citizens of this country. And yes, I think the Public Accounts Committee, I will speak to the Clerk of Parliament, that is a priority. Restoring or reconstituting and certainly getting active that committee will be a priority.